Welcome to the Prime Property Finance Podcast with Gareth Morgan and Mark Watts. This unique podcast will deep dive into all areas of property investing finance, going behind the scenes with property professionals, investors and clients. Between us, we have 35 plus years experience in property finance. The podcast has been launched to share knowledge, mindset requirements and experiences of successful investors and professionals. We aim to simplify many of the complicated areas of finance and investing and provide valuable and easy to implement tips. Keep an eye out for our new episodes released every Tuesday and Friday. Thanks for listening. Mark, how are you?
Yeah, very well. You okay?
Yeah, good, thank you. So, welcome. Here we are. First podcast. Looking forward to it. Should we dive right in?
Yeah, let's see how this goes.
Today we're going to talk about buy, refurbish and refinance. It's basically one of the staples of property investing, the main strategy used by most people to develop their property portfolios and their investments. So, yeah, do you want to just give us a little bit of an intro or explanation of exactly what BRR stands for and what it is?
Yeah, it's one of the most frequent conversations we have around finance for investors, for sure. BRR or BRRR or BRRRR, whichever model you choose to use. But ultimately, it's buying the property, refurbing it and increasing the value and refinancing at the higher value. The concept or the thought process behind it really is being able to increase the value, pull out the money you originally invested into it, and subsequently giving you that pop back to go again and again and again. So it's super common because it's probably the quickest way to grow a portfolio. But as we'll discuss as we go through, it's also has a number of challenges around it, not just in deal finding, but also the things that need to happen to make sure that you can actually get to the end goal as quickly and as efficiently as possible. But yeah, we'll dive into that in a bit.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what you mentioned there around BRR, by refurbish, refinance, it allows you to invest with momentum, right? So you can take one pot of cash and go through a deal, do the deal, and then refinance and pull that initial pot of cash out to then go and do this again. So for me, one of the best things about property investing, better than any other investment strategy, such as investing in the stock market, just saving cash, or other things which with a bit more added risk to it, such as crypto potentially, is that you can take the one pot of cash, you can use other people's money, you can buy a property in cash, for instance, you can then refurb it, there's too many R's here, refurb it, add value to it in any way that we'll talk about in a second. So you can buy it with other people's money, you can refurb it, and then you can refinance that property, pull all the money back out, give the money back to the investor, and you end up with a property that you own, an asset that you own that is going to long-term go up in value. It's got equity baked into it, and it's also income producing. So, in terms of being able to create net wealth for yourself without having your own pot of cash, it's phenomenal. So it's a really powerful investing strategy.
Yeah, and the other thing as well is, we talk about ROIs. So one of the things, when we talk to clients about is, is it property or is it an ISA or is it stocks and shares or is it, gold or whatever it is the asset class of the moment. If you get this strategy right and you've technically left no money in the deal, you won't get a better ROI because it's an infinite return. You can't effectively do better than that because you have no money in there. So therefore, it's just a tool that keeps giving you income. So, it's really useful to compare that against other asset classes perform at 8 or 10% going forward, rather than just looking at what is your gross and net yield at the end of the project.
For some people listening to the podcast for the first time, please just explain ROI out a little bit so that people fully understand that.
Yeah, ROI, good point. Return on investment. So what we're looking at is there are multiple metrics in which you can measure the performance of an investment, especially in property, and I'm sure there are plenty of others. There are some complicated models out there, but our ROI or return on investment is simply how much have you left or used of your own capital in a transaction, in a property purchase. So if you just simply bought a buy-to-let and put your 25% deposit in, you would just be measuring the net return or the net income that you're getting off the property on an annual basis as a percentage of the total cost to buy the property in the first place. ROI in terms of BRR, or buy, refurbish, refinance, ultimately, when you get to the end goal, you have no money left in it. Therefore, the net income as a percentage is, there isn't a number, it's infinite. Therefore, trying to beat that is a bit different.
Yeah, and I guess from my background as an investor, the holy grail for me was BRR, where you had all your money back out, therefore having infinite return on investment. On some deals, we actually managed to pull money out on top of what we'd spent, which that's the goal. And from an investing point of view, it's really clear when you set out to start investing and doing deals is having, and I talk about this a lot, is having an investment criteria. And what are those standards that you want to have for your deals? What are the ROIs that you want, the minimum ROI that you want or need from a deal to make it worthwhile? And that's one of the really simple metrics that you can use to assess whether a deal is worth doing or not. Because as I'm sure you have as well, is we get asked the question all the time around, is this a good deal? And the issue is, is it a good deal for me? Is it a good deal for you? Is it a good deal for somebody else? Like I mentioned earlier, for me, I was always looking, when I started buying property, we were always using other people's money. So it was all about getting as much of that money out of the deal as possible, in which case sometimes they were good deals, but we had to walk away from them because there wasn't enough money coming back out on refinance or quickly enough. Whereas I've got clients, excuse me, I've got clients who are more, maybe they're high earners and they can generate deposits quite quickly just through saving, and they're not so interested in about a higher ROI. They're just happy to put their money, park their cash into assets for long-term asset creation and long-term wealth creation. So it's horses for courses. It's trying to understand what works for you and your set of circumstances, and then using that as one of the metrics for when you're looking at a deal.
Yeah, and this is just fraught with nuance. There's so much nuance in this, and as you say, it's your personal objective. On average, there's a saying around averages. Someone with their head in the oven and their bum in the fire, on average, is comfortable. So just stay away from the average return at 8% is your target return. It needs to be nuanced to you as an individual. You might be able to tolerate a 4% return because you want the capital increase, the value increase over the long term, whereas somebody else needs to have that money in because they're trying to replace an income or something like that. So yeah, setting your own objectives to this is key, really.
Awesome, thank you. So let's break things down a little bit more. And I guess the purpose of today's podcast is to just go through at a relatively high level what BRR is and what it stands for: buy and refurbish and refinance. We're going to keep it relatively simple today, but what that's going to allow us to do is pave the way for the coming weeks and months, where we're going to break some of these topics down in a lot more detail, so that the listeners can understand what makes a good deal and the more nuances, and giving them as many tips as we can around buying properties, how to add value, and then how to refinance and things to look out for there. So if we just touch on the buy element, what from your perspective, when you see these types of deals, let's talk about, we're not necessarily going to talk about what is a good deal and what isn't a bad deal, or what isn't a good deal, rather, because that's not necessarily the purpose of this. What we're trying to do is highlight the actual way that these things are set up, the types of properties that are being purchased, the type of purchase, how you can purchase it, and the type of finance available to actually buy a deal in the first place. So if we just touch on those one by one, what type of properties do you generally see fall into the buying category for this type of strategy?
Yeah, good point. So we discussed this a lot. I think at its very highest level, it's properties with problems or properties with opportunities. Let's be a bit more positive about it. So, and that can take many different forms, can't it? Which can be, you can take a commercial property that has more potential as a residential, and do that conversion process. You can find a property that has perhaps been unloved, not major refurb, but certainly unloved. You see these very much through probate properties, probate purchases. So where you can acquire that, you can spend a reasonably low amount of money, get it uplift in value from that perspective, all right through to fully dilapidated, a shell of a property, and so on. So I think properties with opportunity to increase the value sums it up. Where you find those then starts to become a bit more detailed.
Yeah, I think the one program that's probably hammered this home, excuse the pun, is Homes Under the Hammer, right? So where there's plenty of these celebrity TV program shows showing before and afters. So those are the ones that people understand, that kind of triggers people's interest in property in the main, and understand you can buy an unloved property and quickly turn it around and get it rented and then income producing, or flip it on for a profit. And like you said, that category is a huge space, isn't it? In terms of the buy element. But ultimately, for the BRR model to work, you need to buy a property that has, like you said, it's either tired that it needs a refurb, so you're going to add value through refurb. It has potential because you can add value through some sort of planning gain. Or it might just be the fact that it's very undervalued. You've picked a property in an area which that there's going to be capital appreciation over time because there's a new railway come in, or there's a new hospital being built nearby, and the demand in that area is going to shoot up in the sort of short to medium term, and you'll get a lot of capital growth from it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be through refurb or planning gain, but those are the two that we see the most. Okay, so then if we move on from that sort of type of properties, what types of purchases do you see most? Is it through auction? Is it on market or off market?
I think a lot of people turn to auction thinking they're going to get a bargain. It's at auction, it is a quick sale, I'm therefore going to buy this and what have you. From experience, we speak to a lot of people that want to go to auction to buy property. And I can't back this up with stats, but the feeling is we probably end up helping about 10% of those conversations to actually purchase the property for various reasons. It's gone way over what the price is that you've set yourself a budget for. It transpires when you've done a deep dive into the legal pack that it's more than just a light refurb and a probate sale, and so on. So auction is where people default to, I think, in the first instance. But as I say, we don't actually see that many purchases converting based on the conversations that we ultimately have.
Let's just touch on auctions a little bit more then whilst we're there, because I think that this is a fascinating topic, really, and this will definitely be an area that we'll dive deeper into in the future. I think the dynamics around auctions have really changed since COVID. I think we bought a number of properties at auction in the room and also online, and it's a very bizarre and a different kind of buying environment when you are in a room and you can see who else is bidding on the properties. You kind of might know some local investors that you're bidding against, and what they are actually, through experience, what their buying attitude is like. They'll kind of buy anything at any cost, or they'll, and what their limits are. But when you're sat behind your computer and you just have to press a button, it's very much like shopping on eBay in the early days, and it's very easy to get carried away in that sense, but you don't know who you're bidding against either. So that brings a different set of challenges. But it brings in more buyers from a wider area because they don't actually need to be in the room. So there's pros and cons to it. But ultimately, that boils down to, from an investor's point of view, in terms of getting the right deal. Obviously, the less people bidding at auction, the better from an investor's perspective. The question the first one I always ask people is, say, when they say, "Oh, I've found a property at auction." Okay, so why is the property in auction would always be my first question. Understanding, yes, it's a probate sale, it's a repossession. Those are the two kind of ones which are very tired. They need a sale done without being messed around. They just want a guarantee of it. And then the other side of it is, well, it's because the problem has issues. Maybe it's not mortgageable because it's been left empty for a long time, in which case they don't want to go onto the open market because of, it's only then cash buyers. And people think that it only needs to be cash buyers, but actually you can buy that with a bridging loan. So if you ever see a property for sale online or on the market that it says cash buyers only, don't be put off by that if you don't have the cash, because you can actually just buy that with bridging, and a lot of people just don't know it. So that's interesting. But yeah, auctions, I think it's buyer beware. and once that gavel falls, then you're exchanging contracts, and it's not a case of being able then to pull out. We've had a couple of people come to us after they've won the auction without having had any of the pre-planning stuff done in terms of checking the legal packs, making sure they can get the finance for it, understanding what they need to put into the deal. So yeah, don't be that person effectively. Be prepared before you go. But again, we'll come on to that in more detail in future.
Yeah, and the other one is on the auction front, and I appreciate we'll do a deeper dive in this, is, the legal pack is there for a reason. Obviously, you can read it yourself, but paying a solicitor, a good solicitor, several hundred pounds, could save you tens of thousands by buying the wrong property. So I think you have to be prepared to spend money on the due diligence process if you're going to go to auction. Arguably, on any property you're going to buy, you need to be able to prepare to spend something, and don't cut that corner.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think what you mentioned just now around what's the percentage of people that come to us saying, I want to buy this property at auction, but they don't go anywhere. And I think that's one of the points, that at that point where now you have to spend some money. If you're seriously considering buying this property, you're gonna have to spend some money before the auction. And I think that's one of the big tipping. People don't think, oh, hang on, I don't want to spend money if I'm not going to buy it. But actually, it's the best money you'll ever spend. To protect yourself. So
can avoid a massive issue. So but we'll, as I say, we'll chat more around auctions.
Okay, cool. But let's move it on a little bit then. So let's just talk about the types of finance available for the purchase for these types of deals.
Obviously, as finance brokers, we'll spend more time talking about the methods that we use or assist with in that front. So You've got a few different options, really. There aren't a massive amount, and the products follow the same sort of structure. You can obviously buy it using a mortgage. One of the things you said to me months ago, we were just chatting around this, and didn't even dawn on me. BRR doesn't have to be done in 6 months. It can be done in 6 years. It's still, it's a longer process, and it's not as fast as what people may want, or what is being sold as the strategy, if you like, or the business model, whichever you prefer. You can use a mortgage to buy it, do it up quietly over time, and then remortgage it at a later date. And then we've got your bridging finance and refurb finance. That's available. Bridging is purely there to help with the purchase. Refurb finance, as the name suggests, is to help with the purchase and the refurb. And then the refinance element then is subsequent to be the mortgage. So on the buy-in, it's bridging, refurb finance, or development finance, depending on what you want to call it.
Do you want to just explain the slight difference, because you've got development finance and you've got refurb finance? And people sometimes get confused with the two. Do you want to just quickly explain the difference between them, if there is any?
Yeah. And that's the point. There isn't much of a difference, really. So how it's worked out and how it's calculated is exactly the same between refurb and development. Development, so the main difference is the amount of work that's going to be done on the property. Different lenders have different descriptions or criteria as to whether it's considered light refurb, heavy refurb, or development. Development is usually reserved for your ground up, so building new houses, new properties from scratch, to large refurbs, so large commercial to residential conversions are typically there. Heavy refurb will be, you might have a property with a small amount of structural work, perhaps put an extension on the back, something like that would probably sit in your heavy refurb camp. And then the light refurb is going to be, you might go back to brick, but it's none of it structural. It's all going to be stud partitioning, rewires, plumbing, kitchen, bathroom, your usual. So that would fall in the light to heavy. Some of the criteria points that some lenders will have, again, they differ massively. Some of them just state the structural element. Some of them will have a percentage spend of the purchase price of the property. So yeah, there are some nuances, but ultimately the product is the same.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. So at the moment we've got mortgage as one form of financing, so it's just a standard mortgage. We've got a bridging loan and or a development loan, depending on the project itself. So then the biggest one of all that people will be aware of is cash, obviously. So those are your financing options, but then you've got cash as an option. And then there are some more creative things that you can do, or creative ways to buy, such as purchase lease options and vendor finance. We'll probably talk a bit more about those again in the future. But for me, probably the key one to talk about now is cash. And what we see is a lot of people will use investor finance in order to buy in cash, and as an alternative, because they think potentially that bridging finance is expensive. For instance, when our job really is to educate people around, well, what is it expensive against? So if you compare a bridging loan versus a mortgage, then yes, it is expensive, a little bit more expensive, not as expensive as it used to be when rates were a lot lower. But especially in a specialist finance space, they're not a million miles away now. But you can't compare them because they're not really used for the same purpose. Generally things that are unmortgageable, you can't get a mortgage on it, in which case you can't compare a mortgage with a bridging loan because you can't get a mortgage on it. So that goes out the equation. And then the comparison then needs to be cash. Is it expensive cash versus bridging loan? And oftentimes you can use investor finance to buy in cash, or if you've got your own cash, then obviously that's great. But there's obviously an opportunity cost of getting a better return with that cash elsewhere. So it's not free money necessarily, because you're going to pay for that in some shape or form. What we do see a lot of is people who find a great deal, and obviously great deals don't hang around that long. They've been promised money by an investor, and then they find the deal, they get to go and do the deal, they need to move quickly, and then the investors decided to change their mind because their daughter's now getting married, or they've got a grandkid on the way, or they've had a change of circumstances, and that money isn't available anymore. Then you have to find time to go and find another investor, and then you haven't got the cash anymore, and now you lose the deal because you can't act quickly enough. So that's a cost of doing business or not using bridging potentially. If you've got a bridging loan lined up and you've already got terms agreed prior to finding a deal, you know exactly what you need. The bridging lender's job is to lend money. They won't pull out of a deal because somebody's got engaged or there's a baby on the way or something along those lines. Their job is to lend money. They want to get money out the door as quickly as they can, but they also want to get the money back in as quickly as they can so they can lend it out again. So that's their business model. So they're not going to not lend as long as the deal stacks up. So, and they're not going to not lend either if the property's unmortgageable, because there's some issues with it. That's the purpose of the whole facility.
So just on the cash front as well, you talk about bridge lenders wanting to lend, and why do some deals just not complete? Valuations, which we'll come on to in a bit, but certainly in the legal due diligence exercise, people find this to be tedious sometimes and a barrier to doing business. And I get it. I understand some of the questions that are asked appear to be irrelevant and just nitpicking. However, if you do that as a cash buy, so the danger here is acting as a cash buy means you answer to nobody. It's you, the solicitor, your solicitor, the buyer's solicitor, the seller solicitor and the seller. You answer to nobody. So you have the power to take on decisions around risk, whatever you choose to do. The solicitor can advise or advise for or against whatever it is. And we have seen scenarios where people have bought in cash, accepted a risk which they thought wasn't really much of an issue, which has then meant the property is no longer mortgageable, or there is a significant amount of money that needs to be spent. So bridging also acts as a bit of a fail-safe. You might see it as a bit of, and yes, we get the feedback, oh, my solicitor isn't doing that, or the lender solicitor's asking this and asking that. Well, there's usually a very good reason why that is, because the lender knows what they're doing 9 out of 10 times, not all the time, but 9 out of 10 times. They know what they're doing and they know the questions they're asking, and they ask those for a specific reason. So again, cash is a great tool and you can act quickly, but you can make some pretty basic mistakes in that exercise, which could cost you dearly in the refinance process.
Yeah, 100%. And this is, again, talking about is bridging expensive? Again, it comes back to that conversation using a broker, and that can be any broker, but any good broker will act, their primary role is to act as your first triage point, effectively, to say, right, let's have a look at the deal, let's understand it, what are the numbers, what's the purchase price, what are the costs involved, what's the refurb, and then what's the GDV, the gross development value, what is this property going to be worth at the end, and what is your then, if every broker that's looking at this type of deal should be really getting to understand the exit. If they're not asking you about your exit, then you've got a problem. And so really understanding the exit and what your plan is to pay back that bridging loan. So that will be your first element of triage. Sense checking your numbers, sense checking the deal, understanding the whole project, the project as a whole. Then once the brokers looked at it, then they pass it on to initially their contact at one of the lenders. That person, the point of contact, will do another set of triage on the deal whilst they're producing some terms to understand the deal itself and is it one for them. Then the application goes in. It's been triaged then for the third time by the lender's underwriter. The lender's valuer is going to take their own set of eyes on it. So that's another level of due diligence. The lender's solicitor is going to do their due diligence. So you're getting a number of hits in here to check whether this deal is worth doing or not, and whether there's anything to be concerned about that can make it fall down. So as a fail-safe, like you said, there's a number of steps that you're going through, climbing the ladder to make sure that this deal is one that you actually want to do. And the amount of deals that fall out of the chain from our side that we see at various levels on that ladder is surprising. And like you said, we've had experience where people have bought properties in cash without going through this laddered approach to the triage and the due diligence, and then I've come out on the back end and have been really struggled to refinance that property then to get their cash back out because there are too many issues with it. So yeah, 100%. Again, it's another way to really understand the nuances of a deal and whether it's a good deal or not.
Yeah, and something that just sprung to mind as you were talking then was this other one, which is the steps that we're talking about, the fail safes, BMV or below market value. Obviously, that is again another method of the buying element and buying well and so on. And that probably is another episode in itself because that is fraught with other nuances. And obviously, the logic is, well, I'm just buying extremely well. It's worth 200. I'm paying 100. I'm exaggerating to make the point. But then trying to explain why the lender is nervous about facilitating a purchase like that, potential distress purchase and so on, ultimately it can be legally challenged in court and unwound, and then the lender's left holding the baby in effect because they've got a loan outstanding which can't be repaid. But that's something to have a look at as well. So there's a number of reasons why cash is great. However, using more structured funding solutions helps protect everybody involved in the process.
Yeah, the other thing I also think as well, sometimes, lenders or solicitors or valuers come back with points and you think, is that necessary? And clients will oftentimes really think, oh, they're really nitpicking here. Why are they going into, and without it, and they just kind of get a bit frustrated with the process without actually understanding the reasoning behind some of the decisions. And I think that's our jobs as brokers, is to kind of really make sure that they understand the reason why they won't lend on a distress sale, for instance, or if the property is next door to a commercial property or a takeaway, why that impacts the valuation and various other things.
There was one other bit there that, and you mentioned around that. I think the reason that is a conversation that needs to happen is, but from the client's perspective, it's quite an emotive thing. You found this deal, you know it's going to work, you're going to make X amount of pounds, and somebody has come back and put a pin in that bubble. And it's quite an emotive topic at that point. So I think that's just something to bear in mind. Don't get too emotionally attached to the deal. If it's not one that's going to work, or it's one that's got challenges presented to you, understand that that's in your own interest, not somebody just trying to be difficult.
And also, this always, when we're coming at this with a BRR mindset, this goes back to what we said earlier about being clear on what your criteria are, because just because it's been downvalued, it means that what that might mean is that you get less money out at the end. Well, depending on your criteria, that may not be a game changer for you or not, a deal breaker. Just because it's been downvalued, it just means your ROI drops a little bit, but it's still within your criteria. That means the deal can still go ahead. But for other people, that down valuation might mean that it is a deal breaker because it's now pushed outside of their criteria. So again, it depends on the client. All right, cool. Well, look, we've covered a fair bit there, and I know we're going to cover some of those items a lot more in detail in the future. So if we look now on to the refurb element, and whilst it's called by Refurbish, Refinance at a high level, Renovate it could be called. I'm also one that to point out at this point, it doesn't necessarily need to be a refurb that needs to happen. We covered that a little bit at the moment, but if we just talk, I always say add value. How do we add value? Let's buy a property, let's add value to it, and then refinance it, if the goal is to keep it, of course. So, if we look at some of the ways of adding value, yes, in the main is a refurb. And like you just described, that could be a light refurb. It can be a heavy refurb. It could be some sort of development. So you could be building extension. Then you move into the more commercial things. So you've got commercial to residential, and that could be any sort of commercial property, and then converting that into residential apartments or houses. You've got a residential and converting that into a HMO. The other common ones that we see are from a planning gain. So you're going to, again, and the commercial to residential is a planning gain of sorts, but you might buy a piece of land, put in planning permission, get the planning, and then that's increased the value. So then you can either go and sell that land with planning for a gain, or start then developing it out. The other one that we see, which is quite common, is lease extensions. So there's lots of apartments and flats all over the country which are leasehold. They've been around for a long time, and the leases are sort of coming to an end. The owners don't have the cash to actually buy the extension on the lease and then trying to offload it. But these are also properties that tend to be probate properties as well, because they've been in the family, the person's lived there most of their life, the family don't want anything to do with it, they don't want to extend the lease, or they can't afford to extend the lease, and they're looking to sell those properties. So with the right buyer coming in, understanding how lease extensions work and being able to fund the lease extension, they could do zero refurb whatsoever, but add significant value to that property through the lease extension. So it doesn't always necessarily need to be, like you said, a refurb necessarily in order to add value. Can you think of any others that might fall into that category?
Yeah, definitely. So on the residential side, you've got title splitting. So if you've got a block of flats that's on a multi-unit block, it's valued with a discount because as a block, it's only, when you think about how you sell it, you can only sell it to an investor effectively. Nobody's going to buy that as a home. Title splitting then means that you open it up to the whole of the market. Therefore, you'll get an uplift in value, often 10, 15%, something like that. The other one, which I thought you were going to say, but commercial. So if you buy a commercial property with an existing tenant and you renegotiate the lease, some commercial valuations are based on the quality of the lease. So you can literally just sweat the asset, as they call it, which is what asset managers will do, renegotiate the terms of the lease, which in turn will increase the value of the property. So a lot of these appear to be more paper exercises than actually getting your hands dirty, hacking off walls and building extensions.
Yeah, I think asset management is a big opportunity at the moment. There's lots of commercial properties potentially that are unloved or empty or vacant, especially now with people looking to offload things with changes potentially to the inheritance tax bandings, plus people paying empty property rates on empty commercial properties. So there is definitely opportunities out there within the commercial space. Again, it's not necessarily a conversation for now into the nuances of that, but that is a massive space. And like you said, asset management is mainly a paper exercise rather than a refurb exercise.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great. Well, look, we won't add too much to that. We're not when it gets into the refurb elements, we can talk about the refurb side of things, and that's something that we'll always ask the question of people of what is the refurb and how much is it. Probably just the one point to note that we see a little bit of is people not fully understanding the costs of refurbs. When we talk about refurbs, people oftentimes will come in with a finger in the air figure for a refurb because they did something 10 years ago, and the costs now through the cost of living, increase in materials, you've got the war in Ukraine, inflation, there are so many reasons why costs have gone up, and the cost of labor and the cost of materials have increased, that it is really something that you need to drill down on, because developments and refurbs, heavy refurbs where there's a lot of work involved, they can be made or broken by the refurb. So having some professionals on board, a QS or a builder that has that QS element within it, can really drill down and understand your numbers, because when you're looking at bigger developments, the price per square foot or the price per square meter, but oftentimes people just consider the refurb part of it, and then they don't consider all the professional fees, the insurances, the warranties, and everything else that goes with it. So again, that's a conversation for another day to go into deeper, but the key for me is for people to really understand the refurb element and what that looks like.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more. If you're going to use refurb finance, one of the comments, the commentary in the valuation report will be for them to look at the numbers that we've presented for the refurb costs, and the valuer will comment on whether those are realistic or not, and then will comment on what they believe them to be. So they'll either agree or disagree with you. Now, if you're doing a refurb, say 40,000, valuers will start to comment on that then. If you're doing it for 20, then it's not so important. So this number doesn't have to be particularly large. I know 40,000 is still a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of property, it's not. Is that will be tested at the valuation stage. So just be realistic with it, because you don't want to spend that money get yourself to a point where I've got one on the table at the moment where the build costs have come back from the value at a third higher, and it's broken the deal. Now it's cost nearly £4,000 to get to that point with valuation fees, application fees, and so on and so forth. We're not there to tell you that your refurb costs are wrong. We're just there to say, are you sure? And so on. So bear that in mind. Also, something else to consider is if you were doing the work yourself, say you're a builder that's clearly got the skill set to be able to do this and deliver it, that refurb cost may be 100,000, but you using because you're not paying for labor or anything anymore, it's just materials in effect. You can get it done for 50,000, for example. Bear in mind the lender may not accept that and the reason for that is if you don't complete that project and the lender has to step in and recover that property, they won't just sell it part complete, they'll finish it themselves and more often than not. They'll then have to employ another builder. Now that builder won't be doing it without the labour costs. Therefore, they will budget that into the actual equation. So whilst we know you can do it cheaper, in reality, the lender has to protect themselves. So again, run your numbers as if it was a third party doing it. Yes, you will save it, but you have to be realistic. You could, the other thing as well, if you're being pessimistic about it, you could get injured during the process and have to employ somebody else. There are reasons why you can't finish your own project and so on. So just bear that in mind. And the other piece that I would say on the refurb element is RICS, RICS, who are the governing body for surveyors, or the regulatory body for surveyors, or all things surveying. They do have a pound per square foot table in effect, which will lend itself to different geographical areas. Obviously, the pound per square foot to build in central London is quite different to the pound per square foot to lend in Neath in South Wales. So again, geographical nuances will exist as well. So, and we do see a lot of investors that will have accumulated money because they live in an affluent area, but realize investing in that area perhaps doesn't make financial sense and will invest outside of their areas. So understanding what that pound per square foot bill cost is going to be is key. And one other before I stop talking is bear in mind the finish that you're going to do. So the appliances and so on, you can really run away with that. Understanding your audience when you go to refinance it or sell, you don't have to put high-end fixtures and fittings in everything if your market doesn't demand it, but that can materially blow out your build costs or your refurb costs just by getting carried away. You're not doing this to live in it yourself, you're doing it to give it to someone else to occupy.
Yeah, great points. Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. Okay, let's move on then to the last part of this model, which is the refinance element. And again, going back to keeping it at a high level, buy, refurbish, refinance. Just probably a point to note here is that it doesn't have to be a refinance. This model works for flipping properties or selling them on for a profit. So you buy them, you add value through the aforementioned options and avenues, and then sell it. So you can just go straight back on the market. You could sell it at auction. You can sell it on the open market. You might have a seller lined up before you actually buy the property. I know a lot of developers now are, before they even start developments, they are engaging with housing associations, government organisations to buy the properties off them before they even put a shovel in the ground. So there's lots of different routes to do this type of deal. But we're keeping it simple for the main type of investor and landlord that we deal with, where they're looking to build a portfolio, they buy, refurb, and then refinance. What type of refinances, again, what kind of deals and strategies are we looking at here?
So, I mean, the answer is always going to be mortgage at this point. The property is ready for long-term finance. You've done the short-term hard work, if you like, and now, you put in a longer-term solution for that. Now, the type of mortgage will be determined by the occupancy of the property. So what I mean by that is a HMO is an occupancy type. a single let where you just put a family in and that's it. You know, it's your simple buy to let. That is an occupancy type. You might have a corporate tenant that wants to occupy a residential property. That's an occupancy type. That'll sit in a commercial lease. Social landlords or social landlords. That's an occupancy type. You've then got commercial property. There's an occupancy type that will sit in there. So that occupancy type that I said quite a few times is going to be the key driver ultimately to how you will get a mortgage or what mortgage you will raise against. It will also, and we haven't really spoken about valuations yet, but it will also drive the valuation methodology that's going to go into it as well, and what you can expect to get on the refinance element of the property. So yeah, it's going to be a mortgage, but it's ultimately going to be based on the occupancy.
And again, this is what I talk about in terms of our jobs as brokers, to come in and when clients propose a deal to us, you know, we want to get understanding of the deal at the outset. So what is the project? Explain it to us. What is the deal and what are you trying to do? And as they kind of explain and show us their numbers and explain what the plan is, any broker worth their weight, as I mentioned earlier, would be really getting to grips with the exit. What is this property? What are you going to do? And how are you going to pay off this? If it is a bridging loan, how are you going to pay it off? And, you know, there's a couple things that you probably didn't mention there, but one is residential. Lots of people, you know, you might see an ideal lifetime home at auction that isn't mortgageable, and you think, well, I fancy living there, and that would be an ideal property for our family home and your dream home, but it's just not in the condition where you can get a mortgage on it. So you could get a bridging loan to buy that property. You can renovate it, and then eventually you can move into it, remortgage it on a residential basis, and live there as your primary residence. So people can and often do use the BRR model for their family home. The great thing about using this model for your family home is that it's tax-free. And so you can do that, you can flip it on, you can move into another one, you can live in it as you do it up, or you can live with your in-laws potentially whilst you're doing it up, which I'm doing at the moment. So there is a bit of method to the madness, but it comes with its challenges at the same time. But that's probably not something we'll dive too deep into now.
Cost of doing business, I think they call that.
That's right. But it's a great time, and we're enjoying it. So
you're only saying that in case they listen.
Exactly. And then other things, serviced accommodation or holiday let is a really common one, and supported living. So if I just touch on those two as an example, both supported living and serviced accommodation are probably a little bit more advanced investment strategies. And if you are a first-time landlord presenting a deal to us, you're a first-time investor and you're presenting a deal to us for the first time, and you say, right, this is a deal I want to do. I want to convert this into an 8-bed HMO, and I want to put a supported living lease in place at the end of it. The conversation for us will be very different, or we'll have to highlight some issues within that quite quickly to say this probably isn't a deal for you on your first deal, because you haven't got experience. And the issue isn't getting the bridge to purchase, it's actually getting off the bridge at the back end is the exit. And this is why the exit is so important. And people will say, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. I might do a HMO, I might do a serviced accommodation. They're very different things. They're different planning classes, depending on where you are in the country. And it's really needing to know the nuances of how that exit will look. Again, is it going to be buy to let, which is a bit more straightforward? Are you doing it through a company, or are you doing it in your personal name? Because if we take serviced accommodation, there aren't huge amounts of lenders that will do serviced accommodation in a limited company. Is it a multi-unit block as well? You start adding these layers of complexity to the deal, and that's where your broker will be able to talk you through all of the different options available depending on what you plan on using this property with. And of course, things change, as you go through a deal. The market might change, circumstances might change. You might hear there might some news might appear that might make a certain strategy better halfway through the deal, and those things can change. But what is your number one main intention when you buy this deal? What is the plan for it long term? And that makes our job a lot easier to make sure that we can get you the finance that you need to get off it once you've completed the project.
Yeah, and also being realistic and understanding the cost of that finance. So doing a single let, if as a first-time landlord, or let's say it's your second buy-to-let property, you're not a first-time landlord. It's quite vanilla in so much that you're going to put in a family in there, professional family, whatever. You'll have the whole of market. You've got a job, all of that. You're gonna have the whole of market ultimately to shop in, and your interest rate's going to be relatively low in comparison to other products. Whereas if you move up the spectrum then of complexity, that costs. So everything is risk and reward. So lenders' interest rates reflect the risk they're taking. So if you move up the spectrum and into the more specialist lenders, that's why the price goes up, because they take in bigger risk, more complex deals. And have you actually budgeted the correct interest rate? Because you might get to a certain point on the refinance where you've budgeted that on 4% and it's actually 7% per annum. That can be a material difference in the income that you're going to generate and the ROI and so on and so forth. It may, I've had conversation with people where they felt like it's just not been worth it at the end. I mean, there is a degree of reframing that needs to go on there as well, because they still are taking most of their money out and the ROI would still be a lot better than if they stuck it in an ISA, for example. But just understanding what that looks like on the refinance will stave off disappointment when you get to the mortgage element and go, I thought it was going to be cheaper than that.
Yeah, great. And like you said, I think we've covered a lot then, different elements of it, and the key part of speaking to a broker, and that can be us or can be somebody else, to understand what those rates are likely to be on the exit, so that you put in those figures into your due diligence at the front end, so that you haven't got any nasty surprises once you've done the deal. Again, all of that forms part of the due diligence process, and a lot of people get put off by property investing because the amount of time and effort that goes into it up front without actually having without actually even doing a deal. And the more experience you get, the more times you go through that process and you get the feedback and you learn from it and you improve, you'll be able to quickly look at a deal and understand, right, the way I look at deals now, I can pretty much find a property on Rightmove or Zoopla that would kind of meet my criteria, and then I can what we call it the fag packet figures, the Hamlet challenge. I can run those numbers quite quickly to understand whether that deal is going to work for me or not based on my criteria, and whether it's worth exploring further. So I wouldn't even get to the point where I book a viewing. I can just move on to the next one quite quickly. And that's the kind of place you want to be once you've done this enough times, is to really be able to understand your numbers, understand your criteria, and then go, right, yeah, this is something I'll explore further. You then put it through your calculators and your in-depth due diligence and go, right, yeah, this is something I want to explore, and then you book a viewing. So a lot of the work is done before you even get to the viewing. You don't want to be in a place where and we've probably all been there when you start out, is booking viewings and then actually realizing it was a waste of time. And when you start valuing your time more, then you won't go around wasting your time and also the agent's time, And if you're trying to build relationships, they'll soon pick up that you're wasting their time. So you don't want to get into that habit. So yeah, I think being able to quickly understand what does a deal look like, how does it work, and the nuances of it. And hopefully we've given some tips and guidance on that. So let's kind of just sort of recap then. So just from a buying perspective, what kind of properties can you buy, and how can you add value to those in order to recycle your cash as quickly as possible so that you can buy more properties as quickly as possible. if that is the goal. And again, probably is having clarity up front on what are your property goals as well, because some people kind of get into it and they're not clear on, they just want, I want 10 properties. Okay, well, why do you want 10 properties? You know, is it a cash flow thing? Is it an equity thing? And you might be able to do that with 5 properties if it's a cash flow item. Or so it's just understanding more around what it is you're trying to achieve. So then once you've identified those properties, you bought them, you've added value, and then you're refinancing those based on a different strategy that you're going to put a long-term tenant in there, whether that be residential, HMO, serviced accommodation, or more down the commercial space. So hopefully that's been a really good and just high-level knowledge around the various types of BRR and what that means and what it looks like. Like we said, we're going to deep dive a bit further into a lot of those different areas in the future. So keep an eye out for those as they come up. But just some top tips then, Mark, now on for anyone looking to do more deals, looking to do their first deal, or looking to grow their portfolio. What top tips have you got for people to consider?
Yeah, so we've got three tips written down here. Before I go into it, I just want to sort of reiterate really is, we've obviously highlighted some of the challenges around this, but it doesn't take away from the fact that property as an investment strategy is very much up there with the best of them. It is a lot of work, it is a lot of effort, but it can be materially very rewarding over the longer term as well, and the short term as well, in fairness. So, don't want to think we're putting doom and gloom on it, but it's certainly it comes with its challenges. So we're just trying to make sure everyone's got their eyes wide open when they get into this. A few top tips really from today. Some takeaways is the valuation itself. We've not really spoken about that in any form of detail. We will do a full. I mean that's probably 6 or 7 episodes to be fair, but valuations. Take the time to understand the valuation methodology that's going to happen on your particular deal. It will be different per deal. So that can make or break your transaction, your deal, really, if I'm honest. So take the time to understand what that looks like. I can't stress that enough. If the valuation doesn't meet up with your assumptions, you could find yourself in a bit of hot water, especially if you're using other people's money and you have to get that out of there in a time frame. So just bear that in mind. Something that is super, super simple, but massively overlooked is your personal credit. Okay. Whether you're a first time investor or you've got a portfolio of 100 properties valued at 50 million plus, your personal credit still comes into play. So CCJs, defaults, it becomes, in fact, the bigger the portfolio, the harder it becomes to stay on top of your credit report because, tenants may not pay the water bill, which turns up as a default on your credit report and so on. So I can't stress enough, if you don't look after that, you're going to make your life particularly difficult to get anything done. And then the third one is coming back to the buying element. Most deals are made when on the buying process and making sure you buy at the right value or the right price. So just not being a motivated buyer. You might have to kick a lot of tires to find a deal that actually fits into your criteria, and try not to mold your criteria to fit the deal. Make the deal fit your criteria.
Yeah, 100%. I think I had an example of that on the weekend where I've got a friend of mine who's a client. He's looking to purchase his first buy-to-let investment. He's probably had 2 or 3 properties that he's had offers on and they've fallen through, and he's desperate to buy his first one. And we were at this party and he was telling me, "Oh, I'm gonna buy something in the next couple of weeks. I'm gonna buy something." I said, "Right, listen, I can see the desperation in your voice. I know you're desperate to buy something because you've got the money there burning a hole and you think it's not doing anything. But don't buy, don't be a motivated buyer." Those are the exact words I said. And his partner was there and she was like, I knew it. I've been telling him the same thing for the last couple of weeks. He's just desperate to buy something. And it's a great place to be, but it highlights a really important point that this property is going to be with you for life, really. Don't rush into it. Make sure you are buying the right property. buying a property is an expensive endeavor in its own right. There's a lot of fees that comes with it, stamp duty and solicitors fees and buying costs, etc. Don't just buy something for the sake of it. Buy it because it meets, it's going to be a good property for you in the long term, and it's going to give you good returns, and it's going to be a solid property and not giving you headaches over long term, and then something that you just end up selling because you'll end up going backwards if you sell it within the first couple of years because of all the fees you've paid.
Yeah.
So don't be motivated by I love that one.
Yeah. No, that's. I think there's a topic. I mean, we could probably make a super long list of that as well. But we've narrowed it down.
I'll just loop back onto the credit as well. I think that's super important. And my background dealing with residential mortgages when I first started out, before I moved working more with investors, was, the credit's crucial. But so many people don't actually check the credit on a weekly, monthly basis and keep on top of it. I think there's 1 in 3, don't quote me on that, but I think it's something like 1 in 3 people have a mistake on the credit file. Whether that's something that's been reported wrongly, it's not been updated properly, they've had some fraud taken out on, identity fraud. So there's lots of reasons. So if you think, oh, well, I don't have any credit, then that's a great reason for you to check it, to make sure that you don't have any credit and nobody's taken out credit in your name, for instance, or things could be reported incorrectly. So there's so many reasons to that. So just get it checked.
Yeah, on the credit report one, so I suffered something along these lines years ago now, and basically they put my address in twice, and therefore double counted everything I had, 2 mortgages on the same property, and so on and so forth. And I was like, why is my credit rating so low? I'm up to date on everything, and so anyway, I spoke to them, and it was a manual exercise. So in today's world of technology, you would have expected it to be but it was a case of, oh yeah, somebody's probably entered that incorrectly as a data entry point. And I was like, are you serious? That is such an important document or piece of information, and somebody has just keyed it in twice by mistake. They had to change straight away, and it got affected. But don't assume that this is a very technological solution. I was really surprised how manual the back end of this was then.
Yeah, and what we'll do as well is we'll drop in the show notes. We've got a link. If you don't have your credit report and if you haven't looked at it before, we'll drop a link in the show notes so that you can get a copy of your credit report and understand it a little bit better. And that's one of the first jobs we'll do with new clients is let's have a look at the credit report. Let's go through it, understand if there are any mistakes on there, make sure everything is up to date, so that we know going forward that it's going to be a good thing. And just an example of not managing this properly, it wasn't a client of ours. I was at an event and I was speaking to somebody who took out a bridging loan, and they were halfway through the project and they got lumbered with a CCJ in between after they took out the bridging loan, but before refinancing, and that left them in a hot water because then they really struggled to refinance. So again, those are things that can happen if you don't watch your credit properly and make sure you're managing and paying your car parking, your speeding fines, your car parking things. And if your friend on Facebook says don't worry about it, it can't affect you, then they're probably wrong. Just pay the 30 quid or 60 quid fine or whatever it is and just let it go. Don't argue over the nitty-gritties of small fines like that can end you up in CCJs and then end up costing you on mortgages thousands of pounds in additional interest that you don't need to pay ultimately.
Yeah, so we had a similar thing. We were refinancing, block of flats, very experienced developers. One of the the partnership or two of the directors, one of them emigrated, picked up a parking fine which he wasn't aware of, obviously unable to forward the address. I think it came to about £300. We were doing about, I think in mortgages, it was about 700,000 in mortgages across 3 or 4 properties. Be pre-drawdown, pre-completion, they just lenders will just rerun a credit check to make sure all is okay. And this had appeared between application, offer, and completion. And despite their portfolios very, very strong and so on, wouldn't budge. It took about 2 weeks. Luckily, they jumped on it, got it, but not even paying it off wasn't even an option. They had to have it completely removed off the file. which, as you can imagine, is quite the challenge off the back of it. So I can't stress enough, 300 quid could have cost this a £750,000 refinance.
Yeah, great. So top tips are really understand the valuations, make sure you manage your credit and keep an eye on it, and highlight any issues that may be on there and get them fixed ASAP. And, don't be a motivated buyer. But I guess that comes back to, and I think all of these strings are part of your due diligence, making sure that you're prepared before you buy, a super expensive property as part of your investment plans and your portfolio. So look, let's finish there. It's been really great chatting with you, Mark, around and understanding and hopefully sharing some tips and tricks around growing a portfolio using the BRR method in order to invest with momentum and keep buying more properties, or as many properties as you can, with the same pot of cash ultimately, and hopefully finding the holy grail of an all money out deal. So thanks very much. I'm Gareth Morgan.
Yep, I'm Mark Watts. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Gareth.
And if you want to know more about any of these deals, or if you've got a deal that you'd like to discuss, then please chat to us at Prime Property Finance. We'd be more than happy to talk you through one of your deals, or get some terms, or give you some options on rates, etc. for any of your deals, and talk you through them and hold your hand through that process. So if you want help with that, just give us a shout. Many thanks for listening. Really appreciate it. Hope you stayed to the end. And hopefully catch you soon. Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We hope you have learned something and have some tips to take away. We'd be very grateful if you could give us a review and subscribe to the show. If you'd like us to answer any questions or go deeper on a specific topic, then please drop us a message. And also, please follow us on social media. All our different handles are in the show notes below. Thanks.